During that time in the police, I met a lady which was a psychometrist. We used psychometry, and I tested psychometry extensively and found a few interesting points where, for instance, that if one used a photograph to do psychometric reading, the more photographs of the same person you put together, the stronger the signal would be, the more information they're able to get out. And we looked at that information, and I tested it by actually following it up. Some cases it was so, some cases it wasn't. What seemed to be very clear was that the person reading the information had a definitive impact on what information would come through and how they interpreted it. And therefore it is quite a difficult thing, and that it seems that there was some kind of barrier. You could only get certain information. Up to that stage, at no time, and I had then sessions with my father-in-law as medium several times a week. So I was fortunate I had my own full-time deep trance medium. In the beginning, he could not trance without the generation of energy. We used the church organ sound, the organ sounds of church music to generate energy. Then the beings will come through to talk, the people from the afterlife, one after the other, and we would record the sessions. And for about an hour they can continue, and then the energy would drop, and they would say the energy is dropping. Eventually, what they said normally is you need quite a number of people in a group together that talks the whole time to generate vibrations so that the beings can actually speak through the body. Now in a deep trance medium, for instance, when the being comes through, the person who's in the body actually disappears. They do not remember a thing. This one event I learned something fascinating, because at one stage my father-in-law wanted to die. He tried to get out of the body, and I was instructed how to bring him back into the body, and what they call pull him back. And it was very clear that he was outside his body, and that they had to get him back inside his body. So from that perspective, I understood that it was possible to leave the body. I didn't really understand at that stage the impact of that particular event, but I did as they showed me what to do, and I pulled him back into the body. His wife was there as well. She was with, and the two of us together put him back in the body, and he was very angry because he wanted to die. He wanted to leave the body, and he said to me, "You cannot trust anyone in heaven." He said, "You can trust no one." To me that was like strange. I did not believe him. I thought he was simply just angry because he had to do things in the war that he felt heaven should never have put in front of his door. And he blamed heaven for those choices he had to make. And so from my perspective, he was simply angry, and that his form of revenge was directed at the spirit world for what happened in the Second World War. Because in the Second World War, he had to make a choice between two friends of different sides of the war, and he had to kill one of them to protect his men. And he had to slit the throat of the being because it was in the danger zone behind the lines, so he was absolutely disgusted with having to do that. So in the exposure, obviously now, with discussing with many beings, some hundred that's been on Earth hundreds of years ago, and then they would discuss their existence. One being that came through a lot was Keizer Wilhelm van Hohenzollern from Byron. He came through, we had many discussions with various beings. None of the discussions though ever would be awfully spiritual, although some would come through and pray. For instance, Paul Kruger used to be the president of the Jimmy or Transvaal a long time ago, would come and pray for his people. And they would talk about God as the white light, in whose face you cannot stand, you cannot face it, the light is too bright. So I was intrigued by that because the God was depicted as the light.
Have you ever heard of God as a white light?
Never particularly, although yes, there is mentionings of that in the Bible, God as light. I studied the Bible quite extensively. So by the time I finished in the police, I've had 4.5 years of regular channelings, on average about an hour and a half at a time. I've seen various phenomena, for instance, where with a single movement a cat would become, without any life force, the cat would turn like into a fur that you can place over my arm, and it will fold over my arm. There was a particular fear about cats, so they wanted cats not to be close to the deep trance medium. They said it interferes with the ectoplasm. There was also a point of light. The channel couldn't bear bright light at all. So it had to be done in semi-darkness. Bright light would cause extensive pain to the body. Also, meat was not allowed to be eaten. For being eaten meat, they would throw up. And obviously my father-in-law deliberately tried to eat meat to try and stop the gift or the skill or the ability to channel. But he was a healer, so
did he have a specific group that he was sort of constantly around?
Nothing. He did not want to have anything to do with it. After his studies, he did not form any groups. Nobody came to him. He did no readings for anyone. He was basically just a healer, doing healing using homeopathy. When I came on the scene, it seemed to have activated all of those things again. If I have a headache, for instance, I'll go to him and then he put his hands on me to take the headache away. He could do shit like that. He would go into trance. They demonstrated, for instance, for cataleptic paralysis, where the body turns into a statue. So you're standing there like a statue, you can't move it, which is fascinating. Moving things like closing doors, opening doors, using ectoplasm. They basically use ectoplasm for that. The ectoplasm, what was explained to me is that ectoplasm was not in the same quantity in all bodies. Some people carry more ectoplasm and they become deep trance mediums. He was born with the ability. It was not something that he was trained in. He predicted the application of the King of England many, many years ago, when that happened as a child, and therefore because that happened, that prediction, they called him the prophet, because he made predictions that places like that thing happens. So I was in a way disheartened, and in a way not. was very interested in finding a solution to the world. How, to me, what was quite fascinating is that heaven on earth couldn't just happen. It was something we had to practically participate in for it to become real. That was what has become clear to me as I was studying the scriptures. And obviously in discussion with the afterlife, these things were kind of sidestepped. They never talked about it. And they never would answer questions clearly that's related to anything about the spirit world. It was as if that was a topic that was not allowed to be discussed. So from there I was involved in investigating various things involving fraud at the level of money. And I was warned by the spirit world that that is something not to investigate, because you would be killed if you do. So when all of these things started going haywire, I decided to stop and leave, and I moved to Durban.
And where were you previously?
I was in Johannesburg. I was at the biggest police station in the country. I was stationed there. So I then was in Durban, and primarily had to make a living. We started going into education. For me, education was the key, and to assist people. For 7 years I worked in mathematics, because to me, as I could see, if one has got a reasonable mathematical ability, your ability to work out a living answer, something that, a contextual answer within your living expression, would be enhanced. But I found that it was limited. People seem to forget something. It's as if it never becomes real. So you study at school, and then after school everything you've learned at school just disappears again. The only things that remained was, for instance, your tables, your basic bonds and so on, things that you have learned parrot fashion, off by heart, those things remained. Things that you studied as knowledge that you didn't take to the parrot fashion form, you tend to forget. So that was a curious observation, because it would indicate that if you have a better memory ability, you seem to have been able to do better in the world. In investigating that, I became aware that our reading ability was really atrocious. So I was fortunate that I was identified with such a problem when I was about 18 years old. I did courses to enhance my reading ability, and that changed my life, because it placed me in a position to observe information independently, meaning without preconceived ideas. You first read the information, look at it without your belief system, without emotional influence, without your preconceived definitions, because that influenced the outcome of the information, and then you look at it. Which allowed me to be more critical about what I'm reading in terms of whether it is practically real, practical, sustainable, practical thought. Slowly but surely that ability started to influence what I have accepted as real. It was very clear that the message from the Bible was a peculiar message, strange message, that was full of contradictions. And so I decided, due to my exposure with the medium, that obviously there is definitely an afterlife there. I had no doubt about anymore, because I had many conversations and many points that were shown that very clearly indicated that an afterlife existed. So in my investigation of the psychics, I went to as many as possible, wherever I could find, and I went there and simply just listened to compare the various readings between psychics. I never had, from all the, and I've been to many psychic sessions, besides my father-in-law, probably an extra 100 sessions that I did over years. And never was two messages the same in any way whatsoever. Or could anyone pick up that I've been to other psychics? And I had strange experiences where things would be predicted that would happen, and then it would happen, and then, but I had an interesting notion of that. I looked at it that I am not obliged to follow that, so therefore I would sometimes deliberately stop and not follow it, which made the psychics very angry, because they said, this is a message from God, from the spirit world, and I must adhere to it. I simply said, I'm not willing to do that. I mean, I have free choice as far as I was concerned at that stage. And suddenly, from their perspective, I didn't. So I found the whole free choice thing early on challenged, even by the beings from the spirit world. So initially, there was no big notions or big thing. I studied Krian channelings. I studied conversations with God extensively, the Pleiadians, life of teachings, Book of Miracles, what is that?
Course in Miracles?
Course of Miracles. Many books. I have my own library, extensive. Joel Goldsmith, The Infinite Way, the Saint-Germain writings, all of those, and I would, Melchizedek,
Shambhala.
Yeah, I would go into it intensely. I would intensely study it. I would just read the book, I'll have it on tape, I will listen to it over and over and over again. I will test it out, I'll live it to see how effective it is, and if there is any value as a living support for myself in this world, which I can demonstrate through example to others. To me, the principle was that one must find a way to be an example at that stage. In that I kept on developing software for reading abilities. There was many setbacks, but I stuck to the point of what it is I really wanted to do. To me, it was never about the money. It was finding a way to support people effectively, even if they don't understand that such a point is available. To find a way, to me, was the more children I could help to read effectively, to have an effective vocabulary, the more their chances to actually develop their own worldview independently of the influences that exist, that is limiting our reality. So I applied it with my own children, and that was quite effective. Developed a strong independence, effective critical assessment of points, and very assertive expression. Therefore, they were not easily influenced. To me,